Let me turn the microphone on for a moment. So it's 11:59, and since I'm just going to be doing the kickoff start here, I'll go ahead and get us going. Thank you all for coming out today for the Thomas Barksdale Memorial Lecture. So Thomas Barksdale, we really want to thank the Barksdale family. He's Brian Barksdale's late brother, and we appreciate your support for this. We have information on him outside, but without the support of the Barksdale brothers and their family, we would not be able to do this and bring in great speakers like Dr. Krumholz today. So let's give Dr. Barksdale a big thank you. I will turn it over now to Dr. Butler, who is going to make the further introductions here.
Well, thank you very much. It's an absolute an honor and a privilege to introduce our chief guest of honor for the Research Day and the Thomas Barksdale Annual Lectureship lecturer today, Dr. Harlan Krumholz. Dr. Krumholz is Harold Hines Professor of Medicine at Yale University, where he also directs the Yale University CORE, the Center for Outcomes Research and Evaluation, and he also directs the Robert Wood Johnson Clinical Scholars Program. To say that Harlan is a luminary or a visionary is really not doing justice to his contributions to healthcare in the United States. Just to give you one example, in the early 1990s, when absolutely nobody would believe that we can, in all cities, big and small, and in all hospitals, big and small, across the United States, standardize the care of myocardial infarction and provide that care in merely 90 minutes. Harlan worked tirelessly for over a decade and worked with the clinicians, professional societies, regulators, payers to make this happen just in a span of 10 years, and now we routinely exceed that benchmark. This is just one example. If you look at overall his contributions to clinical outcomes and quality of care in the United States, I possibly cannot think of any other person who has contributed more in that aspect. He's foremost in setting up the standards of clinical care and then also thinking about what are the processes that needs to be implemented in order to achieve those standards as well. He then started thinking a little bit more about how to engage and partner with patients and the important issue of patients' voice in their own healthcare, which is absolutely in a way missing from how we think about provision of healthcare. So then he's thinking a lot about how to improve healthcare from that perspective, and now he spends a lot of time thinking about how to use the information technology and just the healthcare technology advances that we have had, how to use that to integrate both of these noble goals of improving quality of care as well as patients' voice. He's the recipient of Distinguished Scientist Award and the Distinguished Achievement Award by the American Heart Association. He has received the William Harvey Award for Medical Journalism. He's a member of American Society of Clinical Investigation and the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies. He has published over 1,000 peer-reviewed publications. I can go on and on. How do you judge a person's scientific contribution, right? So there's a lot of subjective things, but how do you quantify that? Well, one way some have tried to quantify somebody's scientific contribution is to do something which is called an H-index, calculation of an H-index. And in general, an H-index of 20 for a scientist is good. A 40 is outstanding, and 60 is considered to be exceptional. Harlan's H-index is 178, just to give you a sense of his contribution to science. So it is really an honor to host somebody who is consistently thinking at least a couple of decades ahead to where most of us are today in improving the lives of people going forward. Harlan, it's truly an honor for you to be here today. Thank you. Thank you.
That's some introduction. I'm humbled by it, and it should probably diminish your respect for the H-index. But it's my great pleasure to be here, and I was so pleased to get the invitation. Let me just throw my disclosures, and I just want to thank everyone who was responsible for inviting me. I've had a short but delightful visit, an opportunity to really understand and recognize the kind of hospitality and warmth that I think characterize this community. And I've also been able to get an appreciation for the deep talent that exists here, as well as the critical challenges that you're facing with regard to your population, the rural nature of it, the high number of people of low socioeconomic status and who are highly vulnerable and for whom there are quite a lot of risk factors and opportunities to do better. And the mission-driven sense of this institution, I had a chance to visit with Dan Joneswall, who I've admired forever and knew very well a couple decades ago when we did work together at the American Heart, and the kind of soul of this institution and what it's trying to accomplish, both maintaining its mission to be devoted to the care of those in most need, but also recognizing its need to exert leadership and be on the cutting edge and to be a destination for anyone who wants the very best care, not just the ones who have traditionally come here, but to be broad-based in that way. So it's I'm very glad I've had a chance to visit. I've seen it. I want to say a word or two about Javed too, which is one of the great delights of being an academic is that through your course of your career, you get a chance to meet people, trainees, residents, fellows, who are in formative moments of their career, but who you immediately recognize as having an energy, an excitement, a curiosity, and a drive. And that drive is about trying to make the world better, to find ways to make their contribution. And very early in my career, I had an opportunity to meet Javed and to work together on several research projects. I'll tell you the one secret, if I've had success, the secret of my success has always been that I've been surrounded by talented people, and we've been able to work together in teams to create things of value that we hope will make a contribution to patients in society. With Javed, I found, even very early in his career, just the most wonderful partner, and then I've watched with pride as he's succeeded at every level, and now I see him here and really embrace this opportunity to work with an extraordinarily talented group of people who are here and to help make this place even better as everyone works together to achieve that goal. So it's with great pride I see you here, and I'm just so glad that I've had the chance to visit. So my career has been a lot about, this march forward. And the truth is, I put this as sort of linear, but the truth is there should be whole bunches of arrows going back, but knowledge to application to effectiveness. And, one project after the other, Javed mentioned one of the projects, the idea of how to improve MI care. And, we're pretty proud of what was accomplished. And by the way, it's never a person. It's about a community of healthcare professionals who recognize that AMI care in this country, despite the fact that we had highly effective therapies, was being incompletely applied. So in 1994-95, one of the first big studies I was involved in, we found that across the United States, among ideal candidates for aspirin, of people who had suffered a heart attack, only about 2/3 of them were being treated. In Mississippi, it was even less. It was under 50%. Of beta blockers, among ideal candidates, people who had no reason not to be treated, the national rate was only 50%. 50%, 1 in 2, for a drug that at that time in that population was known to reduce risk by about 20%. In Mississippi, it was even lower. In looking at the amount of time it took to treat people, at our place in 1997, if you came in with a STEMI, it was taking 2.5 hours to get people to be treated with opening the artery. And when we go around our place, everyone would say, we're working as hard as we can. It's the best we can possibly do. This notion of 90 minutes came up because the people who wrote the guidelines said, we can't possibly make it less than 90 minutes because nobody can achieve that. And so around the country, we started looking at this and saying, with what we already know, we have the knowledge, but the application's incomplete. And even when we're applying it, like using something like primary PCI, the effectiveness is diminished because we're taking so long. So we started to focus intently on saying, how much more can we get out of squeezing what we already know? And so throughout this process, we got to the point where there's almost no one who doesn't get aspirin now. There's almost no one. The beta blocker story is getting a little complicated. And the reason I'll say that is because the patients we're treating today are very different from those that were in the clinical trials in the 1980s when BHAT came out. Those patients, by the way, excluded patients with bypass surgery. They didn't have primary PCI at that time. There was a lot more burden of ischemia, and arrhythmias played a bigger role post-MI. So, beta blocker rates have gone up, but there's still some question now about where they should sit in the guidelines. But time to reperfusion, door to balloon times, went from an average of over 100 minutes. Now it's about 45 minutes all across the country. And places that were farther behind, Mississippi was farther behind on some of the metrics in the beginning, are now just as good as everyone else. And everyone's at an extraordinarily high level. And mortality for heart attacks has dropped about 20%. It's dropped from even more, 40%. Gone from about 20% down to 12% in that period of time without the introduction of any new therapies for AMI. It wasn't that there were any numerical meds or procedures that were developed, but we just started working smarter. We started being more accountable for what we did, and we were able to put the pieces together so we could ensure no matter who you were, no matter what your background, no matter what, you come into the hospital with an AMI, you were going to be treated according to the best of what we know. And while there's still ways to go, then we were doing a lot better. But there's a sense of unease I have. I mean, I've taken on these projects one at a time, but I think it's bothering me that we have a system that has sort of adopted into the quality side the way we do drug development in mounting these large studies in large periods of time, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so here's the central premises of this talk. Knowledge generation is too slow, too expensive, and too often off target. The application of that knowledge is often too slow, too inefficient, and too variable by person, place, whole range of factors. And the effectiveness is too uncommonly sought and achieved. What I mean by that is you can check a box that you've done something, but it doesn't mean you've done it in the most highly effective way. And whether that has to do with the timeliness of it, the dosing, the monitoring, the updating, or understanding the social determinant barriers to it. So you can say, I wrote a script, but if people don't have a place to sleep at night, it isn't going to be their priority. If they can't get food, then it's not going to be a priority. If they can't afford it, I mean, I've had residents come by and say, well, it's only $30 a month. You know, people should be able to afford it. I'm going like, live in their shoes for a day, and you tell me $30 a month isn't going to be an impediment. It will be. And so our effectiveness side, I think, and this goes to the story of readmissions, it goes to the story of medical adherence. You know, our job is not done by just saying, here, patient, this is what you need to do. And this gets to building the partnerships and how we need to work together, because we've got to understand what's it like from their eyes. What are they experiencing? And so are we giving them the best options? Are we making sure we're applying it the right ways? And then are we making sure they're as highly effective as possible? And I think another central premise is we're too quick to declare victory. We're happy. We got a trial that comes out. It's positive. Celebrate. Well, that's only one step in the way to make sure that is actually achieving its promise for the benefit of people. We're too complacent to lead change. You know, we're sort of stuck. The inertia in medicine is remarkable. I don't think there can be another field where people are more convinced that, you know, it's just the way it's always been and it's going to stay that way. Instead of opening our eyes to saying, every day we ought to be getting better and thinking about what that drive to improvement's about. And I think we do get too comfortable with the status quo. And then ultimately we're too trapped by our economic models and incentives. If those incentives are moving us to do the wrong things, it's incumbent for us to take leadership and insist upon changing those models. We can't say we are powerless to do anything any different because that's the way the models are. It's incumbent upon us to think about new approaches. And I was telling Javed about, you know, what went on in Louisiana, where the Health and Human Services there said, we've got a lot of folks here with hepatitis C, and we've got to be able to make a difference in their lives. We can't afford Gilead to keep paying for this. And by the way, when it's paying fee for service, everyone's inhibited from actually pushing forward on this. So Louisiana said, they called Netflix model. Let's pay a certain amount of money to Gilead for complete access for the whole state for a year to the hepatitis C drugs. Let us go out and try to let us align our interests so you can work with us to make sure as many people as possible get treated. But I'm not saying whether there's one good or bad way, but if it is not enough to say our economic system in medicine forces us to do things that we wouldn't otherwise do in the best interest of patients. Say that out loud to yourself, looking in the mirror, and say if you really believe that that's why you went into medicine and healthcare. It's up to us to say when there is a cross purpose to the system, we've got to raise our voice, because only we know what it's like to sit across the bedside from people in need. And we have to represent their interests. So I think within all this, I'm going to focus on one aspect of this, which is I think within all this lies an immense opportunity. And I think it's never been more available. And if I'm a junior person in the audience, I'm telling you what I believe to be a very fruitful path to a career that will see medicine change dramatically over the next decade. And I think this opportunity would enable us to achieve effectiveness and efficiency, equity, safety, timeliness, and patient-centeredness in ways that we haven't been able to get before. These are the properties of an ideal health system that were articulated more than a decade ago by the Institute of Medicine, but for which almost every healthcare system still falls far short. And we've got to be thinking together as a community. What are our highest principles? What are we trying to achieve? Not just the work in front of us, which is important. The work right in front of us tends to, though, occupy us completely instead of thinking about how the system is working. And then we have to make sure the daily work returns to its roots. Nothing about the change we make should do anything but potentiate and strengthen the connection between healthcare professionals, doctors and nurses, and their patients. So anything we do needs to almost restore that ability for that connection and human aspects of what we do, and we need to align the finances. Let's do that. So let me just say, I just quickly want to run through what I think are some of the issues in the status quo, the vision for this, and the future. And we'll try to do it pretty quickly. So this is a pretty classic figure that I'm sure you might have seen before, that on the, is showing you basically life expectancy on the y-axis and health expenditure on the x-axis. And if you notice, those are all the countries of the world. And the more you spend on health in general, the more life expectancy you get. Well, it's also a marker of your economic development. I mean, it's not truly just causal for healthcare, but it all kind of goes together. But there's one country that has actually diverged from this over time, and that's the United States. And actually, if you draw a curve, all the countries kind of fit well in this curve. Again, it's also a marker of economic development, which will go along with life expectancy. But there's one country that's falling far off this curve. And it's fallen off the curve for two reasons. We are not just failing because we're spending more money than everybody else, but we're also not getting the life expectancy benefit result that everybody else is getting. Again, it should be a cause for deep reflection about what actually we're producing in this country for a healthcare system we're very proud of, that is heroic and often provides miraculous results, but on average at a population level, again, this social determinants, there's lots of stuff in the life expectancy, opioid epidemic, there's a lot, but not through that whole period, but that gets you there. And this shows you, if you go from 1960 to 2015, you know, we were sort of tracking along with everybody, but as we started doing more and more and spending more and more, we weren't keeping up with the rest of the world with regard to what at least should be our primary metric of health in this country. If we have a leading health indicator, you got to start with life expectancy. There's a lot of other stuff. How do people feel? What's their well-being? There's lots of other stuff you care about, what the cure rates and rescue rates are for different acute illnesses. But this is showing you we've got an issue. And I did this paper on geographical health priority areas for older Americans, where we looked around and we saw, you know, there's also the issue of equity. There's lots of areas of the country whose health indicators are lagging farther behind the entire country. So I'm showing you the entire country, nothing to be proud of versus other places in the world, but a place like Mississippi in particular has got even more challenges. And, you know, if you look at life expectancy in the United States, the light blue is the lowest life expectancies, and they're in the places that you already know. This is very near and dear to you. I don't have to teach this, you know this. But I also think it brings a special opportunity for a community like this to start thinking deeply about strategies that go across the entire population and can actually differentiate a place like this in what it's able to deliver. You've got the talent in the state, but can you think differently about how care gets delivered and what gets achieved? I also saw this, so that's talking about global issues, but I know this is a little hard to read, but this is a recent, you can see, perspective piece in the New England Journal of Medicine, but said, if it requires thinking, I'm sunk. This is an embarrassing admission for a field that provides itself on intellectual rigor. But with the frenetic pace of medicine today, there's no time or space or reimbursement for cogitation. We end up over-ordering tests because it feels more workable in the moment. We over-refer to specialists because we don't have the mental bandwidth to integrate confounding data. Beyond the financial waste, modern medical practice is a petri dish for medical error, patient harm, and physician burnout. Again, I see this as opportunity. It's a big problem, but I mean, I don't know if there's any of us who reading this doesn't resonate with it. That, in fact, we have sped up stuff. There's not enough time for reflection. We don't have the time to dig deep into particular things, and often we're ordering or over-referring just because it gets us moved to the next thing. And the question sort of is, this is another piece to solve. And you're all familiar with this famous painting. Of course, this doctor didn't have a lot to offer, but was at least in close proximity to the patient. Someone took this painting and said, this is what it looks like today if they're going to do that painting. And unfortunately, there's more truth to it than we would care to admit. And so, and then Gawande put out this piece in the New Yorker, Why Doctors Hate Their Computers. Of course, he's very gifted, and he said, I've come to feel that a system that promised to increase my mastery over my work has instead increased my work's mastery over me. I sort of use these introductions because I say there are broad-based areas in healthcare that we should be focusing on that we can make better. And part of it is the mechanics, part of it is the incentives, part of it is the connectivity and the bandwidth that the current world has allowed us. And part of it is that when technology, which could have potentially helped us, if anything, feels like an additional burden to our lives, even though there is promise for more. And, you know, and this is the world we're stuck in. So when you think about someone who comes in for atrial fibrillation, a very important decision is whether they should undergo anticoagulation. And in that is about balancing the risks and benefits of anticoagulation. But instead, what do? We say, well, there's this score, this CHAD. We had the CHAD score, but then we improved by adding a few more elements and going to 9 elements. And then we give, this is, in 2019, this is sophisticated medicine. We teach all the residents, you give a point if there's a hypertension. I don't care what kind of hypertension there is. If they're 130 diet controlled or they're 180 and resistant, you're getting a point. You get a point for heart failure. I don't care if you're diagnosed 20 years ago or you were just in the hospital last week. You're getting a point. You get a point if you're a woman. I don't care what kind of woman you are. You're getting a point. So this makes no sense, but this is built in a world where you say, you know, at any moment there could be Armageddon. And if that neutron bomb drops, we're not going to have access to computers anymore. So we need risk scores that go on our hands with not more than 10 elements, and each one's 1 or 0. And I got a heuristic. If you're 2 or greater, you should be anticoagulated. I'm telling you, that is insane. Like, the 2 points means a lot different to a whole bunch of people who have 2 points. You put everyone with 2 points in a corner, and no doctor's going to look at them and say, those people all have the same risk. But we don't even know how to calculate the risk. And CHADS VASC was calculated, by the way, in the UK on 1,300. In general, if you have 1s, you have higher risk than if you have 0s. But among people with 1s, it's a very heterogeneous group. This shouldn't be the state of the art. I mean, Amazon, let's see, if you're this age and you're male, you probably like these shoes. I mean, that would be like what they would be doing. And like, nobody's doing that. And yet, levels of evidence, I'm also just going to say one other deficit of the status quo. I'm not trying to depress you, but I'm just pointing out stuff. That this study was just published in JAMA, and it said of the cardiology guidelines, what % of them are based on clinical trial data? And it's about 1 in 10 of the guidelines. 1 in 10 of all the guidelines. What % are based on just expert opinion? About half of the recommendations. And that doesn't even count that the recommendations themselves, I mean, they're being generous here. Is there evidence to support that recommendation? But the truth is, even for the class 1A, there's not a recommendation for your patients. For patients who are living in neighborhoods around this medical center, or patients who are 85, or patients who are facing, difficulties with food deserts, or a whole range of issues. We don't have that kind of specific information. So again, we're generating the knowledge we need too slowly, we're applying it too incompletely, and we're not paying enough attention to the effectiveness side. And the question is, are we going to just keep doing it this way? It just feels too overwhelming and frustrating. And I'm saying, I think that there could be new ways of thinking about this. So I started thinking about the tech companies. Now, there's a lot to be annoyed with tech companies, particularly around a lot of issues around privacy. But I started thinking, how do they learn? What is it their model? I saw like, God, with every purchase on Amazon, with every search on Google, with every mile driven on Tesla, they get smarter. Amazon doesn't cut a data set and give it to a bunch of academics, wait 5 years for them to produce a bunch of articles and then distribute those articles in a bunch of journal clubs to the Amazon employees and then try to urge them to act differently in their jobs. Let me just say that again. Amazon doesn't cut a data set, give it to a bunch of academics. I mean, who would do that? Of course, this is retailing, so it's high stakes. So they have to learn faster than we do. I mean, our stuff is only about people's lives. We've got to, like, what they do is the data comes in, and immediately their algorithms are getting smarter. They're learning from them. Every one of your clicks, the next day, they're in a better position than they were the day before. They're course correcting. And they're integrating it into the workflows so that everything goes faster, better, cheaper for them as they learn. And yet, what do? We sequester knowledge. I mean, it sits between a doctor and a patient, or a doctor and nurse. If I see an interesting case, it may be that I give a conference about it. It may be that I tell some colleagues about it. It may be that I rarely write a case report about it, almost never. But that knowledge doesn't join a collective wisdom. It stays sequestered. So I can't really tell you. When I get gray hair, then I've seen a lot of something. People can come seek me out. But why shouldn't it be that I can access the experience of the entire group? I started looking at these cars. I thought it was really interesting. The autonomous cars, who knows where it'll end up? Probably it'll end up that they will be driving us around. But when I first learned about them, I thought, well, yeah, they're making really smart algorithms so these cars can drive. But actually what they're doing, if it works well in the end, all the cars are communicating with each other. They're actually learning from each other's experience, and they're also learning to drive better because of the experience of all the cars around them. And it's actually building a collective knowledge and wisdom that there's a connectivity. And I think that within medicine, we got to start thinking about how do we start building that infrastructure so that we can be in that same position. Now, meanwhile, we're in a world where, I like this guy. This was a couple years ago, but on Twitter, he put up this Twitter where he listed all of these devices that are now like on your phone. Like, this is just so transformational. I mean, you don't need a microphone. You don't need a record player. You don't need a cassette player. Even it was actually, you can use it as a telephone. And TV, watch, alarm clock, anyway, key, all this magnifying glass, flashlight, I can go on. So, the rest of the world seems to be streaking forward in leveraging technology to give you the functionality in ways you've never seen before. For those of you who remember Radio Shack, I got another slide. I'm not showing where you can see a Radio Shack ad, and you said everything in this ad is on the iPhone now. It's like that's why Radio Shack went out of business. It's like there was nothing more to sell except for the iPhone itself. So, why are we still living in a paper culture? Why can't we break through that? And again, you guys have had digital records since 2012. We're still early. I say we're in the adolescence. There was going to be a difficult period as we went to digitization within medicine. But it's time to emerge with a common vision about how we get there. I wrote this piece a couple years ago, Big Data and the New Knowledge in Medicine, the Thinking, Training, and Tools Needed for a Learning Health System. I was starting to try to put together the ideas to say, how can we bring research and clinical together? Historically, like the researchers are over here, they've got their own language, value system, and the clinicians are over here, and they have kind of disdain for each other. They tolerate each other. They build treaties between each other, and then they break the treaties. And and these people can't believe, like, why isn't anyone paying attention to our papers? And these people, like, why are they writing these papers that have nothing to do with the patients I'm actually seeing in practice? It doesn't seem relevant. And it's a very disconnected system. And I start thinking about, like, in a digital world of big data, we actually, if we can learn together from all the experiences of people coming through, then we have to work together. It's not trying to create separate and distinct things. And so what I was starting to write, and other people, not just me, but the essence of a truly learning health system will be its ability to learn from daily experience. The data that's being generated in the everyday process of the practice becomes the inexhaustible fuel to provide insights. And by the way, this isn't just an observational. Then you can build on top of that the ability to randomize. I mean, tech is randomizing in front of you all the time. People talk about A/B comparisons. It's like Google is running 1 million randomized trials every day. That may be an underestimate number, as they try to figure out how do we customize what each person wants? How do we continue to improve what we're presenting? So does Amazon. Now, for us, the randomized trial, it depends what we're testing. But you can imagine if we're testing educational strategies, it might have a lower bar for starting. I mean, I always feel where we are in testing these things, we spend a lot of time building a huge, heavy trial that takes 5 years. And when it fails, we should have been using that money to iterate 1,000 trials where we were doing what the tech companies do. Try this, try that. Learn from it as much as you can, because in the end, if I want to personalize and customize what's coming to you, I've got a lot to learn about people like you. And I need large numbers of people so I can then drill down to saying, what is it that you may like? And then how do we learn how to make things better for you? I think possibilities for change, pattern recognition, right now in this world of big data, we should be replacing a lot of the pattern recognition that humans do with pattern recognition, or at least decision support, because we know angiograms in 2 different eyes can be quite different, x-rays. There's this amazing study that Joanne Elmore did around melanoma, where you had expert dermatologists looking at melanoma slides, and they're making different calls. I mean, so we could be doing much better than that. Lots of decision support. Our workflows could be better if we put the capabilities there to help us master our work, not master us. Predictive analytics, comparative effectiveness, discovery work. I mean, I think that there can be a renaissance of improvements within medicine, both in the knowledge, the application, and the effectiveness, if we can start to harness our ability to control our destiny over our own data, not bringing in outside vendors with proprietary models who constrain us, but put us in charge of what is one of our most valued resources, the actual experience of the people who come through our doors, the experience of the patients and the doctors and the nurses and all the healthcare professionals, and put us in a position to collaborate avidly through common data models in ways that help us learn fast and apply even faster when it's appropriate. So this is my pitch, that I think we can learn from every interaction, and I think we can build a collective wisdom that we can all be proud of together. And it doesn't diminish the importance of the healthcare professional to patient connection. I think if anything, it's going to potentiate it, because it will free up a lot of other time, and it will put us in a position where we can make the connections, but with good information about what works best. And, as we move from this period of paper to digital, it is tragic if we don't leverage it for the benefit of our patients. So what would in other eras have taken an immense amount of resources and time can now be done much more easily. And, just historical context, it was the crash that enabled this. So in 2008, when you get the crash, then you get the Recovery Act, the billions of dollars that were put into to bolster the economy, 40 to 50 billion of it was put into to digitize the medical records. And that was what led to this. It could easily be today, my talk would be, we've got to digitize the records. Because if that crash doesn't occur and that investment didn't occur, it would have been very spotty adoption of electronic records. And you could see, nobody wants to adopt them because we knew the next decade was going to be painful, because they weren't the right vendors. The vendors didn't respect the clinical enterprise. Nothing was built to go right. I mean, it was going to be difficult. And, this was kind of something that happened so fast, most of the clinicians weren't even aware of it. And then we had to live with it. But now we have the capability, the possibility, and that's a question of leveraging it. So what could the future be? Well, some of it is about being creative. The search for ways to go faster. This is a quote that was attributed to Henry Ford. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And it's because people are locked in a mindset. But, I don't care how many horses you put on the wagon train, you still weren't going to go as fast across the country as you were by train, which was the next thing, or what cars were going to produce. But also, it also meant you need to build the infrastructure. I mean, if you kept the roads that horses were on, the cars were never going to achieve their promise, right? You have to build the means by which, let alone if you had to build ways to fuel. And there was lots to work out to create the ecosystem for it to work. But so we've got to start thinking not how we retrofit all of that stuff into the old way, but it liberates us to start thinking about, well, what might be a different, better way to do things. And how does that get us to where we're linking people? And in essence, on the patient side, the pitch is it's a big pay it forward system, because most patients find this very appealing. The notion that I want the next person to be in a better position than I was in. I want the person who follows me, the next person who has this diagnosis, want them to be in a better position. And this really came clear to me in my town. A family friend, veterinarian, had a seizure one day and was diagnosed with a glioblastoma. Was told he had 6 months to live. He ended up going to Sloan Kettering and went up to Farber, stayed at Yale, went all around, tried all sorts of different things, and ended up living 2.5 years. Died tragically, left behind 2 boys. It still saddens me to think about it. But I also thought, like, who's going to learn from what happened to him? Like, his records are a little bit in New York and up in Boston and here. There's no ability for the next person with that diagnosis to leverage any of that. Now, maybe his singular episode can't leverage much, but if everyone with that diagnosis was being culled and curated and we were constantly learning from, you would eventually say the next person's in a position. Now we have enough people that the next person helps us help the next person, and it starts that journey. So I say is that medicine's emerging as an information science. And I believe this could be a central platform for us to rethink what we're doing. That the digital transformation presents amazing opportunities. The biomedical revolution can produce breakthroughs, but we need the tools to be able to do this work faster, better, cheaper. And I say tools using data produced in everyday practice and in living too, because with wearables and lots of other means, we can now get a bigger picture of what people's lives are like to improve research in clinical medicine. And this notion of the whole life comes back to my issue about the social determinants, which is we've got to understand what people's real lives are like if we want to help their journey. They do not live junctures of care, a hospitalization or an event. They live episodes. They're on a journey. And the more that we can understand their journey, the more that we can help them go on more favorable paths. But the more that we just see them as, this is a hospitalization, I need to just get them out. This is this episode, and nobody's really seeing the journey, the harder it's going to be for us to provide the service. Now, real-world data sources, well, in terms of what's digital now, you've got the EHR is just one of them. But pathology, we've got monitoring, the payer's claims, trials, pharmacy, digital and home health, molecular data, imaging. So I believe that when people are talking about this future of precision medicine, it's not going to be about the genome. It's going to be about putting together the totality of evidence about people and trying to figure out what's important, sifting through it. And by the way, this isn't about dumping all this information on clinicians or patients. It's going to be all about filtering and organizing and curating and producing the outputs. And I'll get to a little bit more of that in one second. But at our place, we're building a big data lake outside of the EHR where we are creating this integrated data resource and creating a common data model that's independent of vendor. So we can control our destiny, and I was talking to folks here about that. And so we can look at patient encounters, see if we can predict, this is predictive analytics as an example, but we can do the analytics in almost real time and push it back to the point of care. And we can be learning and pushing it back to the point of care. And this thing is going to be a sort of a virtuous cycle of learning, but we've spent almost all of our time to date creating the means for that to happen, because the EHR vendors are not set up to do that. And if you do stuff within the EHR, they want to say they own it. And we want to say, no, this needs to be non-denominational. It needs to be in neutral territory. And we can't trust that it'll be handled the best way unless it stays that way. And so I'm glad to share this. This is an article we just published that describes our platform. I can send it to you, Javed. Anyone who's interested in seeing it, we're glad to, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. But, some of the things is also, I think, this ability is going to combine. We built a system that allows us to integrate all the data. We have a bunch of, it's called a Hadoop server network. So it's a bunch of servers where you can allocate the tasks to this particular computer. So I liken it to, my camera got a lot better on my phone, but, it's not because of the lens. It's because of the software. So that happened in computing, too. I can put a bunch of conventional servers together, But when the software distributes the task among all of them, it can make them into a supercomputer. It makes them like one big virtual supercomputer. I don't have to go to Cray Computer and buy a supercomputer anymore. I can get that with the software. And then we bought a bunch of GPUs, these things that will run the AI machine learning, can put it in the network, and when you need to distribute tasks to that, you can do that. So then something that would have cost you hundreds of millions of dollars before, you can get by on a fraction of that cost today. And again, we've got to leverage those advances so we don't have to default to either big budget items or doing things that we're trapped with. This one, I just want to show you this thing we're doing with a little bit of AI. I think it's kind of cool, which is, for cath, one of the questions is, what's the chance someone's going to end up with acute kidney injury if they undergo cath and get exposed to contrast? And in this case, we're working with the NCDR database, so not our own, but we're moving this into the electronic health record and leveraging the data in the electronic health record. But what we were able to do is, what you're not seeing is, blue means very low, in actuality, they had a low risk, that this is the outcome. Blue means that group didn't have any AKI. The yellow had a little bit more, and the red had a lot. The y-axis is the pre-procedure risk. So we assess you pre-procedure. What's your risk of getting AKI? And the x-axis is how much contrast did you get? So like every one of those dots, and they're smoothed over, represents a person. So what this means is at the point of care, you can move the data out, you do the calculation, you can push it back, and for the interventional cardiologist, they can even in real time with their patient, they've given a certain amount of contrast, the board can say they're at 20% risk of AKI now. And if you give another X amount, you're going to move them to 30%. You give an X amount, you move them to 40%. They can know in real time what the trade-offs are. They can know, but we really got to use more, or what the consequences are of that. I'm really for informed decision making. I'm not for telling people what to do, but I want people to know what the consequences of the actions are so they can make a choice. And for some people, if you're low risk, giving a lot more, doesn't really matter, right? So then you can say, well, we need more, and this was a low risk patient. Paradoxically, if you're very high risk, giving more doesn't matter either, because almost all those people end up getting it also. But in the middle, there's a big curve, and the more you give, the more likely at lower risk, you're more likely you were to end up getting the kidney problems. But my bigger point is, I don't even want to show them this. I just want them to be in there and see an output. You know, you're at this amount, you're at this risk, you add a little bit more, you get this. And then that becomes an informed choice by them. And these models shouldn't be static. They need to be improving over time. So this is the other thing. We publish a risk model like Chad's VASC, and until somebody wants to publish a new one, that's the one. But the truth is, your calibration may be different than somebody else's. If you've got a high stroke rate in Mississippi, then a Chad's VASC of 2 might mean something very different than it does in Connecticut. And, you know, in certain parts of Mississippi, it may mean something very different. And in certain subpopulations in Mississippi, it may mean something very different. And if you're successful in lowering stroke risks in your state, then the Chad's VASC needs to mean something right away. We need to be able to build these so that they are, and that goes back to the Amazon example. Their algorithm day to day is always changing. And so how do we vouch for its validity? What do we do to make sure it works? So there's one more thing I want to say, is that it's still the problem of longitudinal data. Because if you're working within the healthcare system, you can lack longitudinal data, patient-generated data like wearables, patient-centered, timely data. It's hard for people to get their own data, in fact. We did a study of that. We had a medical student who was doing a secret shopper study, and she's trying to get records for her grandma. And it was just a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. So, you know, part of this is just consumerism, the changing the culture. A consumer digital health data revolution is upon us. And laws in Washington say you are all entitled to your digital data. You have a federal right to all of your digital data at practically no cost. And yet, few people so far are being able to leverage that. So this is, and in my disclosure, I said that this is a startup I've done. And I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just using it as an example of what we're doing. But, you know, we built this platform that enables people to collect a broad range of health data and become active partners in a new era of knowledge generation. My aspiration for this is bring together communities of people who have control over their health data. It's coming in passively all the time to a secure cloud-based space where they can decide who they want to share it with. And when people tell me, but patients will never be able to take, you know, manage their health data. People, you should see my patients. They'll never be able to figure that out. And then that's when I say, well, yeah, it's just like banking. We shouldn't let them have bank accounts either, because they'll never figure out their money stuff. And there's a lot of hazards, and it's a big consequence. You have to, at some rate, say it's their data. It's up to them if they want to do it. And so we've produced ways for people to be able to link to their data sources. And you could link, by the way, to health systems, to pharmacies, to wearables, to CMS. And then we've built ways to integrate it. They can view it. We can send out surveys, get patient-reported outcomes. But it all comes to them first. And then they're the ones who've given permission. Now I can push it to my trusted practitioner. I can push it to my study. And this is how we've set it up, where on the far left, all the inputs come in. And then that's where we've got to do this hard work of mapping all the data so they can use it. We call it Hugo. I named it that because there's a guy, Hugo Campos, who's a big champion for people being able to have agency over their data. He was in this big fight with Medtronic because he had a defibrillator and he wanted its data. Medtronic said, we can't give it to you. We can only give it to doctors. And he became a cause celeb and is very vocal and I think a very admirable person who's been pushing this idea. But you can then prepare the data in the middle, and then the individual authorizes streaming to researchers, for example, or clinicians. And the principle I want to articulate is no data gets commercialized behind your back. No data gets sold without your permission. Nothing moves with it. It's your data. And so this is all about empowering. And I believe in the next 5 years, you're going to see more and more of this, where people are put in a position where they have the data. That's going to have immense implications for telemedicine as well. Because if they want to get someone else's opinion, they'll be able to have their data to sync to where that data resides. And this is some of the stuff we're doing with asking people PROMs, patient-reported outcome measures after surgery, for example. We're able, this is just activities daily living, but we're able to see, okay, pre-op to the far left, then they have the decline after surgery. This person recovered, but we're able to look at a lot of different areas: sleep, pain, physiologic measures, emotion, activities of daily living, cognition. Look at this person right after surgery. Look at the far left on cognition or physiologic or pain. They're at the top. This was an amazing recovery. This is somebody who had a pretty good recovery, but look at the dip. A more typical dip after surgery and then recovery. What's the difference between this person and that person? Were there any things we could learn from the person who had the rapid recovery that would help this person get there? How do we begin to understand this? Unless we have dense data collection like this, we don't ever see this. And then this person had a double dip and then actually experienced a stroke. And so we're just at the beginning of being able to understand, how does this kind of monitoring inform us about how we can intervene? And my dream about it is we preempt. We can begin to predict potential problems, and we preempt problems that are beginning to manifest before they become large and tragic. I'm not saying a stroke could have been prevented here, but there is something interesting in that double dip that suggests that there was something in the recovery that was being stalled. So here's the final. So I think the opportunity is to leverage the digital transformation, to learn from every interaction, to create tools for people, health professionals, health systems, policymakers, that would elevate performance, improve outcomes, and drive value. And I talk more about performance now than I do about quality. It's about making us the best we can be, not about quality assessment. And I've been involved in quality for a long time, so I'm not disparaging that, but it has within our profession a sense of audits and oversight as opposed to potentiation of performance, which, what we can achieve together. And I still think we're on Kitty Hawk. We're just at the beginning. The plane's flying, a couple of yards. But what's amazing about Kitty Hawk was, within a decade, as World War I took off, there were planes in the skies. I mean, it went pretty fast. Once the proof of concepts were developed, the capability to produce what was the aviation industry moved really fast. This is my last question. Will doctors and nurses have to become data scientists for this to work? I say if this is true, we have failed miserably. And the reason is I hope some of the doctors and nurses will become data scientists, because we need that sensibility embedded in the science that needs to be done. But the output needs to be easily understandable, intuitive, easily fit into workflow without the kind of expertise that's necessary to give people advanced degrees. And my example of this, two quick examples. One, weather maps. So weather maps can be complex. They are taking high-dimensional data that's collected from millions of sensors, processed by supercomputers with advanced algorithms. And yet, you know what? My mother can read a weather map. You know, she never took the class. You know, she missed the class. She doesn't know anything about any of this stuff. But you show her a weather map, and she immediately knows what it means. And what's that? That's a tribute to the visualization and the expression of highly complex information in ways that are very easy to understand and are actionable. And then I bring up the iPhone, too, which is, you know, people say, oh, God, my patients never understand. You don't understand. They didn't graduate. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. Or even the docs won't get it. They're just not, you know, sophisticated about it. But they all have iPhones, you know. And who took the class on iPhones? You know, why do we need a whole day course on Epic, but like an iPhone, which is a complicated, complex computer, nobody had to teach anybody about? Like, it's intuitive. It's so clear and easy. And again, my mother, who's 83, you know, has an iPhone and an iPad that she seems to be able to use with great facility. And maybe she's not a power user, but this is where we got to go. We've got to make this not so that you've got to sit in this thing for a whole day so you learn how to use all this fancy new stuff, but we've got to produce output using user-centered design principles that make it easy. So, and the last thing is a lot about technology here, but this is what it's all in the service of. It's in the service of the people who depend on us. It's on the importance of the connection that we have to those individuals and our commitment to maintaining the humanity within the profession, the privilege of what it is to take care of people, but to try to do it with the most advanced tools that we can use so we're the most effective and our performance is the highest possible. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much.
So Dr. Krumholz has a very tight flight to catch, so we will let go of a Q&A session. I do want to give you a small plaque for your
So nice.
participation, and we'll mail this to you. Won't expect you to carry it with you. We can just take a photo and get you
That's great.
going on the road. So this is yours. Great,
Thank you.
great.
Thanks.
I'll talk to you later.
Good.